In this demonstration, I will be importing data, and then we'll explore the data together. From the previous demonstration, I have this empty model. It's time to follow the first steps in the design, and that is to connect to a source of data and import tables of data. So I can achieve this in different ways. I'm going to right-click the model, and I'm going to import from a data source. This then launches the table import wizard, and then I'm going to select that my source is SQL Server. Now, in fact, it's an Azure SQL database, but we can use the SQL Server source for this also. So step one of the wizard, make the selection of data source, and now complete the server name details. I'm going to use SQL Server authentication, and I have an account called read-only user. So this is a good practice. The data model never needs to manipulate data, it simply needs read-only access. So please ensure the principle of least privilege applies to the account that you're connecting with. We'll save the password and then select the AdventureWorks data warehouse. Now, my trick here is that when it's selected, notice how it's copied or selected. I copy that to the clipboard and I come straight up to the top, and I always like the friendly connection name to represent the name of the database. Now, when I click on the advanced properties, I have the ability to work with different providers. Now, I know ahead of time that where this demonstration might head is that I want to deploy this to Azure Analysis Services or perhaps work with Direct Query, and I know that the provider that's going to support this best will be the .NET Framework provider. Step one is defining the connection to the database. And step two, because this is going to connect during a process, what identity is going to be used to connect to it? Now, because it's an Azure SQL database, the only option I have is to use service account. Otherwise, if it was an on-premises database, a good practice is to use a dedicated domain account and then to use it to connect on your behalf. As a relational database, we arrive at the step that gives me an option. Am I importing from a list of tables and views, and this supports multiple tables imported in the same wizard activity, or am I going to write a query that will import a single table? For this first part of the demonstration, I will leave the default, and then when I click Next, I've arrived at the last step, which is to select the tables that I'm going to import. Let me scroll down and start with the fact finance. Now, often what I do at this stage, recognizing that there are foreign key relationships between this table and its related dimension tables, I could click Select Related Tables. And then it has added that there are these three related tables, which is all very well, except I don't want the dim date table. Remember, I added in the V corporate date view. So let me scroll down and select the V corporate date. Now, one other adjustment I'm going to make is that I'm not going to bring in the account. There's some special preparation I want to do. In fact, I'm going to join it to a separate table. So I'll come back and repeat the import wizard and then bring this in as a query. So at this stage, I've selected just the dim scenario, fact finance, and the V corporate date. Now, the next step is you'll notice this third column is the friendly name. And this friendly name allows you to overwrite the source name with something that's much more representative and useful for your model. So it's a good practice to go in there and clean things up. That might mean removing prefixes like fact and dim, keeping things short, concise, to the point, well understood. Don't be afraid of embedded spaces because that's all perfectly fine within the tabular model design. The next consideration, and perhaps the most important step to optimize the performance and to conserve precious resources on your server, is to apply filters to tables. Let's take a look by selecting dim scenario. I click preview and filter, and it provides a preview of the data, and what it provides in the column headers is a checkbox enabling me to remove the entire column. Now, for this table, there's no need to remove anything. I do need the scenario key that will be required to establish a relationship to the fact table, and I certainly need the scenario name to provide a friendly label. So I simply cancel this window. Let's next take a look at the V corporate date. And then I see here that I've got numerous columns, and I know for the financial analysis that will be done by this model. We're only interested in certain types of date and for fiscal periods only. So I want to draw attention to what I think is a really important option here, and that is to deselect everything. And I guess if I was on the product team, I would suggest this is the default. I would rather you were made to think table by table what columns you should include rather than perhaps you should exclude some. Let's take the step then of deselecting everything and then introducing back only what we need. So I'm going to introduce the date key. This is required to relate to the fact table. And then I know that I'm going to need to describe the individual date. So I have a date label column here. I have a month label. And if I scroll right to the end, I have fiscal labels like the fiscal quarter and the fiscal year. This is one approach to filtering. I call this vertical filtering, that we can remove entire columns. And yet in this window, we can also apply filters to columns to horizontally filter. So I know that we don't have a lot of history, and so I could apply a filter on the date key. So let's use greater than or equal to, and the key value of 20140101 representing January 1st of 2014. And now I've reduced the amount of rows that are about to be loaded into this table. I click OK, and you'll note the designer gives you feedback that filters have been applied to this table. By clicking on the link, you can review to determine which columns and what condition will be applied, in this case to the date key. Lastly, for Fact Finance, let's preview each row here representing for a date, scenario, and account what an amount for that account was. I note that the first column is like a surrogate key, which in fact is an unusual practice for a fact table, and it certainly has no usefulness in the model we're about to design. So I simply remove this column. And now I'm ready to click Finish and complete the wizard configuration. We can then see here that 3 tables have been created, and with success, rows have been loaded in. Now there's also feedback providing information that there's additional details. Let's take a look. By clicking here, we see that a relationship was detected and automatically created. I close the wizard. And at this stage, I'm going to toggle across to the diagram view, and this is the best way to get a comprehensive view across the model. Here we have 3 tables. I would like to reposition them a little, perhaps resize them. We see evidence that that relationship was created. And we'll come back to the topic of relationships later to complete this diagram. Now there's one more table that I need to add to the model, and that's to define the accounts. Now this is a beginner's trap. People come in here and right-click and they say, I need to import from a data source. And they work from the very beginning, redefining how to connect. The problem here is it will create a new connection that you'll need to maintain. The appropriate way to do this is to right-click. Well, I could edit the data source. That's not, in fact, what I want to do. On the Model menu, I can go to Existing Connections. I find the existing connection, and by opening it, I relaunch the wizard. So I'm reusing the existing connection. And here I select that second approach that allows me to create and import data for a single table. And I'm going to provide the friendly name of account. And here I enter a valid statement. And it's of interest to point out that it's any valid statement that the provider, in this case, Azure SQL Database, can execute. That could include a stored procedure. I'm going to click Design, which launches the Table Import Wizard's Report Designer, or Query Designer. And here on the left-hand side, I can expand the tables and then expand into dim account, and I recognize that I need these particular columns. Now note that the last column is an employee key describing the financial controller responsible for this particular account. That leads me to explore and see that I have the dim employee table, so let me introduce first name and last name. And then when I expand the relationships pane, let's have a look. When I run this query, I know from my experience that there are missing rows because not all accounts have an employee key defining a financial controller. So I'm going to switch the join type from inner across to right outer, rerun the query. And let's see what the data. Yes, there are some accounts, so I don't want to eliminate them. I'm quite happy that the financial controller is just left as empty. Now, satisfied that this is the query result that I would like to load into my account table, I click OK, and the designer simply copies that select statement into the wizard. One adjustment I'm going to make here is I want a single value representing the financial controller. So I adjust very carefully the auto-generated statement here to concatenate first name to a space to last name, and then I also alias it, financial controller. And now satisfied that that is the query that I would like to load into a new table, I click Finish, tables created, statement executed, 99 rows are loaded into the model. So where I finish with this demonstration is that I have now laid out the diagram. We're almost completed with the foundation of the model. We'll come back and look at relationships as the next topic. Where I'll finish up is that when I right-click a table, I can go to. And this is a very convenient way then to switch from the diagram view to focus on a particular table in data view. And to explore the data, I could do things like this. I could filter, show me only the scenario key 1, which are the actual scenario. And let's go ahead and sort amount in descending order. So it's important to note that you're not modifying the data that has been imported and cached into the model. You're simply exploring it, and you can always come in here, as I will show you, column, let's clear all filters, and let's remove any sort conditions. When I return in the next demonstration, we'll address completing the relationship configuration.